Welcome to the Bountiful Chess. I'm Shadow, and where did the -4 rule come from? So it was something people said was supposed to be attached to female characters that because they're female, they get -4 strength. But that actually has never existed in any edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So where did it start? Well, other than people posting it as a meme on image boards and then gaining traction to people actually believing Gary Gygax directly penned such a rule, it may have existed as someone's suggestion in a publication called Dragon Magazine. I didn't find that one specifically. I did find one other that is quite possibly worse and may have led to a response of Gary Gygax writing a optional rule on female strength maximum stats that didn't last very long in the grand scheme of things because he himself never used it. So let's go back to 70s. Dungeons and Dragons came out of old wargaming and created the original dungeon crawler that they use. And the game used to exist as a set of booklets or pamphlets, and you had to get other game materials to actually have everything to play the game, from a survival games map to a war games rules for combat. Chainmail was a war game that they used, but and directly referencing the one thing I found, because Dragon Magazine, they took letters, they published responses, they published things people sent in, things people did at their table, and one of those was optional rules for female characters, and it's painful. It's like, well, I guess maybe in the 70s. Oh, if I pray no one tries to make this tries to update it for modern systems. It is not worth the time, the effort, or the psychic damage. But I'll 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 give you some notes on what it entailed, and I do think that Gary Gygax penned his own rule in response to it. So someone that thought, yeah, women will totally want to play the game if they have a female character they can relate to, right? And we've got to make that character feel as female as possible. What his skewed view of them were. So, along the notes were some stat changes, some of which were, well, most of the stats were the same. You rolled them completely the same. The major differences were strength and charisma. Strength, they changed which dice you roll, and your maximum was apparently 4 below what the maximum for a male character was. That might be part of the origin where people thought -4 was a thing. But with charisma, while the dice also changed, they didn't call it charisma anymore. They called it beauty. And because they didn't have D10s at the time, you apparently rolled 2 D20s and split both rolls in half. So you could be from a 2 to a 20. And that stat was used specifically for, well, three actions. I'll get to that. First, I'm going to go to what they went over next was because apparently in the early versions, uh, levels for a class had titles. And the ones for rogue are not great. I don't know why hag is in there specifically. Succubus, adventurous, and it, but they specifically made rules to say, yeah, you can't, because they didn't want female warriors to ever match male warriors. I don't know if this guy was ever aware of Red Sonja being just as kick ass as Conan. Oh well. So spellcasters, the eventually eventually they just got to calling all of them a witch with adding pluses to it. And it was not great. So then there was beauty was used for charm and seduce. I'll get to the third one after this. Charm could literally make a man drop his weapons, drop his armor, and try to engage rather than fight. And it just, I don't think it even notes that you have to be out of combat to do it. I think you could do it directly in combat, which, why? Why? It's worse than the memes of some bards, I think. Okay, so, and then obviously deduce, but they also had the rule for using it on humanoid monsters. So, and the way they wrote it sounds more like something you'd find out of Fatal than Dungeons and Dragons, or a late night skin flick. You know, the soft kind, not the hard kind. The soft kind you'd find on in the 90s you'd find them edited on a couple channels and in the late night. And it was just okay, but yeah, you'd seduce a hobgoblin and they'd go full unga bunga and try to throw you over their shoulder and take you back to their lair. And he even notes that if you try to fight them at that point, that they'll kill you. Yeesh. It was cringy to read. And it's like, but well, they were either went full unga bunga or they were just dazed for a few rounds, unless you hit them. And I just don't know what this person thought women wanted out of the game. They wanted to be adventurers too. It's uh, they 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 wanted to be Tila or Shira, not not the damsel in distress mid combat. So the third thing was witches specifically could magic with their beauty score. And literally it went from if you had a score of 2 or really low, you could scare monsters to death with your looks. Yeah, that's that. Ugh. And then of course in the extreme beauty scale, you can charm a whole bunch of monsters. It it just did did not write well. It did not read well. It did not look well. I are there women that would give it a go, maybe. But the majority of women wouldn't want to. Why do they get different? I'm sure a lot of women would look at that and say, why do I have different character roles? Oh, supposedly the person that penned them had the best of intentions. He thought this would interest more women in the hobby. I don't think it did. Uh, but sometime after that was printed, Gary Gygax put out his own rule on the optional uh, max strength for female characters, but then said he never used it at his own table. It just didn't feel like it fit. It it's a fantasy game. Why is it needed? It's a game where a gnome can sometimes outpunch an orc. And honestly, some of the highest strength stats are only attainable through magic items. Second edition had in just the basic set of magic items in the Dungeon Master Guide were the Gauntlets of Ogre Strength and the Girdle of Giant Strength. In a game where the strongest people are wearing a magic item, why does anyone need a different max strength stat? Second edition actually has a lot of optional rules. Some that I've never seen used, either because it was just extra math or extra work or not fun. Why limit certain, demi-humans, dwarves, elves, and the like to different max levels on character classes? Especially when we eventually got character options for epic levels. There's something we haven't seen in 5th edition. Uh, so the optional max strength rules apparently did appear in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but by 2nd edition, they were completely dumped. And that's saying, 2nd edition has a lot of optional rules, some of which became like the skill rules in 3rd edition. It even had critical hit location tables, which apparently in Dragon Magazine people complained about hit tables in games. And that was back during early Dungeons and Dragons. So it's saying something when a potentially unpopular rule still made the cut when the different strength maximums didn't. So why do people say -4 strength on the internet? Well, because it's the internet. People on image boards started sharing it and it gained traction, and some people believed it was some part of the game at some point when really it wasn't. Maybe someone printed it somewhere as an optional rule in some publication, but it never touched the official Dungeons and Dragons. So, you know, don't believe everything you hear on the internet. Now, if you want to find some of these things, you can always search Dragon Magazine female character rules, but I just save yourself the psychic damage. It was painful to read. I had a conversation with people about it, and they found it and they read it, and it was like that was just it's not what the game was then. It's not what the game is now. It's amazing. Ugh, it's amazingly awful. And you know, a different max strength never even made it into, as far as I know, the novels associated with different D&D settings. If you read the Dragonlance books, Kitiara, the sister of the Majir twins, they never call her weaker than her brother Carmen. Uh, and I've never read any of the female characters ever charming mid battle. Kitiara did plenty of that out of battle for various reasons, always to manipulate, but she was also a villainous character that she tried to manipulate characters to her dying breath. But talking about the novels, I can save that for our next video. Uh, I've gotten a request to talk about some of the computer RPGs. I will definitely be doing that in a future video. But if you have any suggestions or conversations you want to have, feel free to post down in the comments. If you like this video and want to see more things like this, let me know. If you want to help me out, toss me a like, toss me a subscribe, and roll well, everyone. I'll see you next time.